The next section we're going to be discussing here in Massachusetts, when we're practicing brokerage, when certain events happen, and there's really two critical components when we're either dealing with a rental or we're dealing with a sale. So here in Massachusetts, on a sale, what has to be given to the interested parties during specific events is a disclosure named the Massachusetts Mandatory Licensee Client or Consumer Disclosure Form. And as a matter of fact, in this next section, you guys are going to also see an example, sort of an image of it, and you'll also have access to the actual document. It's important that you guys as agents do understand what this form is and the nature of when you have to disclose it. So it's called the Massachusetts Mandatory Licensee Consumer Disclosure. So no matter what the relationship is established with the buyer or seller, the disclosure is to be provided by the licensee immediately when all three of the following circumstances exists. Number one, we're at first personal meeting. So not over the telephone, not when they email inquiry, when we are physically in front of them. So when we are in front of them during a sale here in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, that's check number one. Number two, when the consumer is trying to discuss a specific property. So they walk into an office and say, hi, I'm interested in buying a place, but they really haven't identified a specific property, or we haven't either, then we do not have to disclose this at that point. So specific property, check number two. And when we're dealing with a prospective buyer or seller, when we're dealing with a prospective buyer or seller, we're dealing with the sale. If somebody walks in at first personal meeting and they inquire about a specific property, and if it's a rental scenario, then instead of this disclosure, the Massachusetts Mandatory Licensee Consumer Disclosure Form, we instead have to disclose to them our fee disclosure. So on a rental, it's a fee disclosure. And the fee disclosure has to be identified. Physically, they have to be able to read through the thing and understand the nature of the charges that the brokerage firm is about to charge them for if they can consummate a transaction many times. If it's a sale, however, we have to give them this licensee consumer disclosure form on a sale. All right. Now, when we're dealing about a specific property, that's also one of the triggers. So you want to remember that when you're sort of in your office when somebody walks in. But when they do, then we have to present this form to them. And what I want to do now is I want to walk through how to complete this mandatory disclosure form. Couple of steps here. So, number one, the seller's agent or buyer's agent or facilitator line is towards the bottom of this section. And in this part, this is where we have to check off how are we representing or whom are we representing this transaction, the nature of our interest. So, as a real estate professional, somebody walks in and refers to a property that we might be listing, then if we are acting as a seller's agent, we're going to check off seller's agent. The point of this disclosure, keep in mind, is to inform the consumer very, very quickly the nature of our relationship in the transaction and to them. A buyer doesn't want to walk into a listing agent's office and give up too much information, which the listing agent in turn has to give back to their seller client because of fiduciary obligation. So we want to make sure that that information is kept, quiet and confidential. So we want to give the consumer the ability to be able to make a decision very, very quickly, an informed decision. So this isn't a contract, this is a disclosure form. We're also going to be checking off if it's traditional agency or designated agency. A designated agency relationship, which we're going to look at a visual diagram later in this module, is basically where the firm is handling the entire transaction and one party or one group in that firm is representing one side and another group or party of that same firm is representing the other side. So that's the two different types, and we'll define what is traditional agency as well. Traditional agency is we are only practicing either seller's or buyer's agency. We're not doing both. Who can sign the form and who must sign the form? The real estate agent must sign the form, and the seller or the buyer, that interested prospective party, can elect to not sign that form if they want to. If the consumer declines to sign this form, then there's a check-off box, and that is another item that we have to check off. We do have to keep these on record, and we have to notate as to why they didn't sign, but we also need to maintain a copy of that. And the consumer still gets a copy of that disclosure form for their own records.